Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the PKF Francis Clark Cybersecurity Deep Dive webinar. Thank you for joining us and for the next 45 minutes. My name is Glenn Nicol. I'm one of the firm's audit and assurance partners and regularly discuss the topic of cybersecurity with my clients. As for most, it's a key business risk that needs managing. It's not going away anytime soon, and sadly, probably never will go away. So we've all got a part to play in mitigating cyber risk, which is constantly evolving, as we all know. And it's about mitigating the risk to a reasonable and an informed level. Cyber risk is not an IT only issue, but it's an organization wide issue, and it needs board, senior management, or those charged with governance to drive and support a cyber security roadmap or strategy and support the wider business, including IT. Government and authorities are very keen to promote awareness of cyber risk, and I'm sure we'll hear a bit about that today, and encourage businesses to take action and responsibility. And today's webinar will help with that focus there. To help us, we have got a fantastic panel of experts lined up to discuss and answer questions, including the police, legal profession, insurance profession, and from a technical perspective. And we'll cover latest trends in cybersecurity, challenges organizations are facing, and reasonable measures that organizations can take to be more cyber secure. We've already got some questions lined up, but please use the Q&A function, and I'll look to pick up those questions towards the end of the webinar. So let me ask our panel to briefly introduce themselves. And Phil, can I start with you, please?
Sure. Thanks, Glenn. Hi, everyone. I'm a Director of IT Assurance and Cybersecurity here at PKF Francis Clark. I lead our external cybersecurity services, been here about 18 months, and prior to that was in KPMG for 12 years. I'm also an independent advisor for a private client for a board on cybersecurity.
Thank you, Phil. Stephen, can I go to you next?
Yes, thanks, Glenn, and good afternoon, everybody. My name's Stephen Richards. I'm a partner here at Foot Anstey. I head up our fraud practice. I'm predominantly a litigator and deal with lots of issues for SME and other businesses, ranging from dealing with external frauds, employee frauds, all cyber related, unfortunately, quite often, peer-to-peer cyber issues with business-to-business contacts, and also dealing with advising businesses on how to mitigate and to prevent these things happening in the first place. So quite a broad spectrum of advice we give to businesses across the board in this field.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. And Kathryn, can I come to you next?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kathryn Brown. I am a divisional director at insurance brokers in the cyber and technology team. I assist clients with cyber risk management and also transfer of cyber risk into the insurance market.
Okay, lovely. And then last but not least, Sam.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Sam. I'm a Cyber Protect and Prepare Officer with the Southwest Regional Cybercrime Unit. We're a specialist capability of policing that investigates cybercrime. My role is to support victims across the Southwest, but also go in before things happen and help them protect themselves from cybercrime and prepare for the worst as well.
Okay, lovely. So, a fantastic panel of experts. Let's just get straight into some of the questions. And Sam, maybe you can sort of kick us off here. What do you perceive to be the biggest cyber threats to organizations right now? What are you seeing?
So we're seeing a lot of sort of ransomware and phishing. That's just not going to go away anytime soon. We talk about it so much when we're doing the protective advice, but it's such an easy way in for criminals quite often. We're also seeing an uptick in supply chain attacks as well, whether that's sort of smaller companies within a much bigger supply chain being attacked, and then the attacks moving through those companies as they've got connections and links and things. But also cloud attacks and Internet of Things. Businesses are moving lots of data into the cloud and not necessarily thinking about the wider security implications, and also all those new little devices that we put in offices and things that, again, we don't necessarily think how we secure them before we connect them into our networks.
Okay, and things like ransomware, I hear lots about those, and I guess it's just constantly evolving, and they just get more sophisticated, and there's just a lot of volume coming out in terms of some of those attacks.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen a change from the standard ransomware, where it's just a scattergun approach, send it to everyone and hope a couple of organizations click on that link and get the stuff installed, to what we call now this double extortion, where they'll steal some of your data before they implement the malware. And then if you don't pay the ransom because you've got backups to restore from, they'll say, well, actually, we've got your data and we're going to sell it on the dark web or make it public unless you pay that ransom. So they keep sort of reinventing ways to try and encourage businesses to pay.
Yeah, and I've heard that, and actually, seen it with some clients where, some of the sophisticated targeted attacks, they've been trying to build up a profile over a period of time, then using some of that data as part of, a successful cyber attack as well. Stephen, what about yourself? I guess do you see things at the front end in terms of preventative and at the back end, but what do you see as the biggest threats at the moment?
Well, I think in addition to what Sam said there, we are constantly seeing new technologies or new methods being employed by the fraudsters and the cyber criminals, but also there's some I should say, not necessarily new threats, but continuing threats. We still see a lot of what we call in-house cyber fraud, disgruntled employees or employees behaving, thinking they're behaving okay when they're leaving, but in fact they're taking with them information. They're not allowed to do that. It's obviously got a digital footprint, and there's a cyber issue relating there. But and those actually can be incredibly damaging to the business. Internal cyber frauds. Because employees know where to look, they know what's valuable, and that's not going away. So I think it certainly falls under this heading of new threats, because it's here for the future and here to stay. What we also see is starting to see at the back end of all of this, looking ahead, is the question of the people's exposure to this, the fallout from cyber frauds and cybersecurity breaches and data breaches. Lots of effort gets put in place to hopefully mitigating these breaches and incidents, and also to making sure that measures are taken to protect the business and to limit the damage. But then businesses are often left with reputational damage, supplier issues, customer issues, lots of challenges, and the tension now we're seeing is really starting to focus on who's liable for this. There's some new offences being discussed in the government at the moment about making corporate liability for failing to prevent fraud, and also I think we can take our lead from what's happening in the US, where directors are personally becoming much more liable here for in effect failing to take adequate steps to put things in place, and I can talk about that in response to some of the other questions we deal with later. But I think that's certainly something to get those directors and owner managers of businesses to sharpen their pencils when it comes to issues about cybersecurity, because I think that's going to be quite rapidly evolving. Who's in the firing line once the dust has settled for this? But I think the biggest threat is going forward is the existing biggest threat. It's human error and it's complacency, and that's both at the operational level and at the C-suite level. Time and time again, I think we are seeing issues, data issues, cyber threats, cybersecurity breaches, which were by and large capable of being prevented by some pretty simple measures having, which could and should have been put in place. So I think, those are the if I can call them the new threats, some of them existing and some of them evolving.
Okay, that's really interesting, particularly the piece in the US. And, I'd read some articles around corporates having to explain how they are dealing with cyber risk and what measures they have in place. I think you were sort of just touching on that there as well. And quite often what happens in the US and some of their governance, some of that does trickle down into the UK as well.
Well, that's right, and we can touch on this in bit in due course. But the essence of the question about who's liable for all this is really down to whether or not companies have in place adequate measures to prevent it. Human error is unavoidable. That's here to stay, and so is cybersecurity breaches. There's always going to be those things, and it doesn't mean to say that someone's always going to be liable for this. But companies and its owners and directors, as long as they've got adequate measures in place to prevent this and they're followed, you should feel comfortable.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And can I bring you in now, sort of, Kathryn, from an insurance perspective? Because I guess things go wrong and they turn to you, and you'll pay them some money, and it's all okay.
Sam and Steve well in terms of the threats. It's evolving. In the insurance industry, the claims that we're discussing threats all the time. We are seeing that ransomware are evolving into that kind of triple and quadruple extortion as well, where they're actually going directly to insured's clients to try and extort again, or there have also been reports recently that it's actually turned into a physical as well. So threatening physical harm to potentially the CEO of a company, or they've taken pictures of their children at school or something like that. The essence is that they want money. That's what they're there for. So it is starting to evolve further. There's a lot of advanced threat groups that broke up due to geopolitical issues in Russia, Ukraine. There's new advanced threat actors are appearing daily, and it's about working out what they are capable of, and kind of working with the IT forensics and other incident responders to help our clients as much as we possibly can.
Okay, that's interesting. And in terms of just sheer volumes, are you just seeing much more activity and more, I guess people taking out policies, but also claims being made on policies?
We are definitely seeing an uptick in claims at the moment with the kind of Ukraine-Russia conflict. There was a lull in, ransomware and other things. Since March, that's really picked up, and there's reports now that ransomware is potentially worse than it's ever been ever. So we're definitely seeing the claims coming through. We're seeing a lot more applications from people that, want to kind of transfer that risk as much as possible. But the kind of the landscape and the regulatory landscape and everything is changing. Clients want to know data is protected and stuff now. So, they are requiring insurance. When you work with government departments, for example, having cyber liability now is a must-have. So it's definitely making people refocus.
Okay, thank you for that. And Phil, I was just going to bring you in now on maybe some of the technical aspects. So, particularly thoughts on supply chain attacks and things that have been in the press, and maybe you want to sort of just draw out a few of those and what they've actually been. So SolarWinds, Kaseya, 3CX, more recently is it Move It, which I think was a Russian-based one, impacting certainly in the US, but some more in Europe as well. What are your thoughts on those?
Yeah, the supply chain attacks, and as Sam mentioned, they're becoming increasingly popular. And I think the hackers have become, dare I say, more intelligent in the way they're looking to obtain information. And if they hack a service organization, so someone in a particular supply chain with lots of customers, especially if it's say a technology or software company, then by hacking one company, you potentially have access to multiple companies. So it's actually really thinking about how the impacts and the knock-on impacts of supply chains, and it could be third, fourth, fifth party down the line. And when we look at some of those attacks and some of the ones that you mentioned, and I'll just give a very high-level brief summary on the exploitations there, but it's not that where you've got 1,000 hackers sat in a room constantly attacking one particular organization for periods and periods of time to eventually get through. The vast majority of the reasons that these attacks are successful, these breaches happen, is actually, dare I say, some form of human error, again, which Stephen and Sam also mentioned earlier, where there's just something very simple that led to something quite huge. So, for example, SolarWinds, there was a particular server, an update server that pushed out updates to all of their customers and their clients. They had an intern at some point that made the password to that update server SolarWinds123. Not necessarily complex in any way, shape, or form. That got hacked. And then what the hackers did is they tweaked an update that then got pushed out to all of the customers. And they created sort of what you call a backdoor into that update. So then when that update got pushed out, there was basically a vulnerability or a way into all of their customer base, not just SolarWinds. You mentioned Kaseya. Kaseya got hacked through an exploited vulnerability. So they had a particular vulnerability in their IT estate, and they didn't have a proactive way of managing their vulnerabilities. So that led to that issue. You mentioned 3CX. That happened through an individual downloading a futures trading platform on his laptop or their laptop, and it was a particularly old piece of software that had already been exploited. So he just basically downloaded a malicious piece of software. and then that gave some external users admin access and was able to hack thereon. And then you mentioned Move It as well, which has actually impacted some other large professional firms. So I know some of the fallout is impacting PwC, is impacting Ernst & Young. There's thoughts around whether it's impacted the BBC, British Airways. There are lots of big companies being impacted by this, not just smaller ones. And it's impacting the US, it's impacting over Europe as well. It's a really common platform being used. That was exploited through something called a zero-day exploit, which they're sort of impossible to protect against because it's suddenly someone's realized that there's something that can be exploited within that particular piece of software or network, and then they just take advantage of it. And it's how swiftly the vendor or the end user can respond to that issue.
Okay, thank you. Sam, I was just going to sort of bring you in here, whether you had anything to add. I think you did mention supply chains in your first question.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Phil said, sometimes it's those big companies that spread those updates through perhaps, but quite often we also see smaller companies being attacked because they are part of a supply chain of a larger company who are sort of the target of the groups after them. So absolutely nobody's immune from a supply chain attack. Just because you're a small company down here in the Southwest, you might supply into some pretty big contracts or companies here in the UK or elsewhere in the world, and therefore you may become a target through that sort of supply chain as well.
Yeah, okay. And I guess, maybe rightly or wrongly, possibly some of the smaller businesses in those supply chains are seen as the weaker link, so they are a particular target, and someone, and therefore get a bit more attention in terms of that supply chain risk.
Yeah, quite often, especially if these small companies are advertising the fact that they now have won this contract or they supply into this particular large organization. It does start making it a little bit easier for the attackers if they're not taking cybersecurity as seriously as maybe they should.
Yeah, okay. And Phil, just on that whole supply chain, I mean, I think I saw that the NCIS, so the National Cybersecurity Centre, they pushed out a report and some material in terms of supply chain risk in particular. I don't know if you'd seen that or come across that.
Yeah, so the National Cybersecurity Centre has a whole wealth of information that, quite honestly, you could be there for days, if not years, trying to absorb it all. But I don't know. Sorry, apologies. I can hear some background noise on someone's mic. It might be worth other people muting. Apologies. Yeah, so the NCSC has a vast array of information, and they do have a vendor due diligence sort of security framework. So they've got huge amounts of information, including sort of tools, templates, guidance around what's best practice, what kind of questions can you start asking your vendors when you're starting to onboard them. It's kind of encouraging organizations to put in some form of in any way form of simple to more complex due diligence, and it's trying to encourage organizations again to be aware of the footprint and the data that's being shared between those organizations, to therefore have that front of mind to say, how are they going to look after our data, because that's going to impact our customers, our clients, our other suppliers.
Okay, thank you for that. And I'm sure we'll come back onto some of the material that's available. And I'm sure Sam might add to that a little bit later on. Just picking up on a particular sort of theme that's come through a couple of times, human error. So I might come to Stephen on this first of all, because I know you touched on it in particular. So the most common form of cyber attack is often said to be human error, and you read various reports, and often 80% or even higher than that, it is down to human error. How can organizations tackle that? Because it's a really difficult one. I think you're on mute, Stephen.
Hi there, sorry about that. Yes, look, it is a problem, but there are some very effective, relatively simple ways that I think that all businesses can do to tackle this issue, and I think it comes down to two things: it's leadership and it's training, and I think, but in a wider context, all of the cybersecurity, I think that there needs to be the businesses that really do well with this is businesses that treat cybersecurity as or good cybersecurity policies as an asset of the business, rather than something that might happen and we'll deal with it when it does. I think it needs to be integral to that. It needs to be embedded into the culture, and that culture will then spread down through the employee base. It just needs to be part of everyone's thinking. But it's all about, I think, good management and good training and good education, and a couple of examples just how simple things can be. We had a case last year where a business was engaged with a supplier, had to transfer a sum of, I think, 1.4 million euros from its base abroad into an account in the UK, was dealing with a supplier. There was, unbeknownst to them, an email interception fraud. And so an email came from a fraudster saying, we switched bank accounts, please can you transfer the money to a different account? And the unsuspecting client did, and they lost their money. There was no insurance for it. We managed to get court injunctions to uncover the first layer of the onion to see who the account holder was, which was helpful to the client. But here, when we drilled down into it, the fraudulent email, the only difference there was the sender, the email address, had one different letter in it from the usual supplier's email address. So the fraudster had gone in and created a new similar looking email address. And effective training can make sure that issues such as suppliers or customers or anyone you're paying to, where they say, we are changing bank accounts, to be vigilant to that, to be very alert to that, and also to have in place systems when you're sending large sums of money to make sure that the checks are done. Sometimes it's sending £1, sometimes it's making telephone calls to ensure that the details are correct. And for a lot of the businesses, certainly a business like ours, these type of issues are absolutely embedded into the culture. But for other businesses, it's not so. And simple issues like this, simple training, making sure that it is part of the day-to-day culture here and everyone understands it, and it's not seen as a stick. It really is seen as a carrot to a better, more successful business. And those quite big, what looks like relatively sophisticated frauds, but can be very damaging to a business, that they can be avoided.
Okay, no, that's really helpful. And I guess awareness and training is a big part of it. And certainly with my audit hat on, one of the things, I often talk to clients around is, do you have a formal process or control where a supplier has changed their bank account? So it does have to go through a formal process, a formal procedure, a formal sign off to help try and eliminate some of that risk there.
Yes, yeah, that's absolutely right. And the other issue is about making sure that the businesses are effective internally at sharing information, that there's an adequate system, a proper system for reporting suspicious activities. And then that's collated centrally, so that the right messaging can be sent to the business about because as I think Sam's alluded to, this is constantly evolving. People are becoming much more sophisticated, certainly than they were 10, 15 years ago. And even in the last year, I've noticed some very, very sophisticated things coming through now that look very genuine, and it's incredibly difficult to spot things. But if quite often, as we've said, businesses are susceptible to fraud because the fraudsters are just pushing rather than really targeting a business, and businesses can see patterns arising quite quickly, and the ability to disseminate that information and then learn from it, I think, is critical here to avoid human error.
Yeah. Okay. Sam, can I just bring you in? I don't know if you've got anything to add on that, or what recommendations you've got for organizations in terms of that human error sort of aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, cybersecurity is all about the technology, the processes, and the people. So if you can have the great technology, you have great in your business to talk about how we deal with cybersecurity, and then it's all about the people. And let's face it, none of us like death by PowerPoint once a year. Cybersecurity, nobody likes the video training exercises because they just click through to the end and hope for the best. It's all about doing it in that really engaging way and also keeping it up to date. So if you're seeing an increase in a particular phishing scam coming into your business, tell people about it, put it in your company newsletter, and just make people more aware. It's that constant updating and just trying to get people on board from day one. And as Stephen said, it comes from the board down. If the staff see the board doing these things and taking it all seriously, they're more likely to do it themselves. If the board starts sort of doing things their own way and bypassing certain things because they feel they're important and they don't have to do it that way, they haven't got the time to do it, then staff are going to find those loopholes as well. So it's building that culture is really important. And giving people that way of reporting, putting their hand up and saying, oh, I know we had that phishing training, but I have just clicked on a link and I know it was stupid, but IT teams can react to that and check systems a lot more quickly and do something about it than sort of people burying their heads in the sand and thinking, oh, if I don't put my hand up, it'll all be okay. Because we've seen several cases where businesses have done that and the worst has happened, compared to where people have the reporting processes and the confidence to be able to say, I made a mistake, and IT teams responding to that before anything can really take hold.
Yeah, and a problem shared and shared early on is quite helpful in trying to deal with some of this. And Kathryn, just from an insurance perspective, have you got any sort of tips or thoughts, or where do you come to the human error sort of side of things from an insurance perspective?
Oh, I can come on. Am I on mute? So, I mean, I completely agree with everything that everyone has said. Employee training and awareness is actually a basic critical control that the insurance industry is now looking for. If we receive applications from businesses that are saying that they aren't providing this to their employees, and that gives a kind of overall view as to the overall culture of the company and their kind of view towards risk. So it is an requirement from the insurance industry, as everyone else said, within of those social engineering claims come through that could have been so easily avoided if there was a protocol or a procedure in place and followed. So we talk about defence in depth often, and your employees are a layer of defence, so you have to kind of arm them with the knowledge of what is happening, what it is they could potentially face, because they are an easy access into your system. So it is about the kind of ongoing education. It's also not just about rolling it out once a year and then putting it away again, not looking at the kind of results of what's happening. If you see some people struggling with it, struggling with identifying a phishing email, or just understanding the kind of implications that cyber risk has to the company, then potentially they need additional training, or they need to be spoken to. Potentially, maybe something else is happening. But it's definitely an area of security, really, for all companies.
Okay, thanks, Kathryn. So, Phil, just picking up on barriers organisations face. I know you talk to many businesses. Some of them are just very early conversations. Some of them you're working with quite actively. But what are the sort of barriers organisations face when implementing a robust framework for cybersecurity?
I think there's a fair few things at play here. So there was some really interesting. There was a really interesting survey that was done across sort of the whole of Europe by a company called Infoblox, and one of the most prominent factors within the UK seemed to be budget. Budget seemed to be a really big issue. So allocating the funds for sort of cybersecurity projects and increasing internal security measures. But I think there's potentially a lack of appreciation where there are knock-on impacts and positive impacts as a result of implementing such a robust framework internally that can lead to potentially positive measures in, and I know I don't want to take away from another question, but possibly leading to reduced cyber insurance premiums. If you can evidence that you've got good controls in-house, that makes you less risky from an insurance perspective, as an example. There's also there's an annual cyber breaches survey that's done by the NCSC, which you mentioned about before. And if you look at in that, there's a significant lack in many organizations, especially charities, that there's a lack of responsibility and accountability for cybersecurity at board or trustee level. And therefore, if you don't have that level of responsibility and accountability, cybersecurity becomes a bit of a hot potato. It's the thing that needs to be dealt with, but no one really wants to hold it. No one wants the responsibility for it because they don't quite get it, and therefore, if you don't quite get it, you kind of want to put your head in the sand about it and hope that it goes away and is an issue for another day. But the reality is that for many organizations, the question is not if a cybersecurity breach happens, it's when. And so it's trying to create and take steps to minimize that in the best way possible. So with respect to those challenges, it's actually recognizing that some budget does need to be allocated, and that actually it's going to create some future benefits to the organization, with also respect to, if you don't have the knowledge, skills, or expertise in house, it doesn't hurt to have the conversation with the right people outside of house. So whether it's professional services, whether it's actually creating a role in house to bring someone in so they have a dedicated role for it, all of those things are really kind of good initial steps that people can take, as well as looking at some of those sort of good steps into cybersecurity, such as say Cyber Essentials Plus, which is a nice government framework that kicked off in 2014, was originally looked at for solely interacting with government and government contracts. Now it's looked at as a baseline level of security for most organizations in the UK.
Okay, thank you for that. And just picking up, you talked about insurance premiums. Maybe sort of Kathryn, you can come in on that. What can businesses do to lower their cybersecurity premiums? I know certainly, ourselves as a firm, we have a cybersecurity policy. Possibly going back many years, it was part of our main policy. I could be wrong there, but it is now a separate policy. The premiums have gone up, and that is just because of the sheer volume and the risk associated with cyber. So, what can businesses do then to sort of get that down?
I'm going to firstly start with, without the kind of basic cybersecurity elements implemented to your business, it's not really a case of bringing premiums down. It's whether you're actually insurable or not anymore.
Okay.
The days where factual offending wasn't or and different things like I've mentioned before about the employee, where those kind of critical elements are missing. It's now a case of you have to implement that for you to be insurable, because you're not even covering the kind of the basic threats. So we're at a point now where judging by the level of your basic security will be whether you are actually insurable, or by what terms that you are able to achieve. When it comes to kind of ransomware cover or something like that, if your controls are seen as poor, then you will face limited cover for ransomware and everything that brings with it. So the critical thing for is how you back up, what your backups look like. Are they separate with ransomware and everything that's occurring at the moment? Are they secure? Are they secure from a ransomware attack? Basically, you've got that remote access piece of multi-factor authentication. That needs to security there. You've also got the issues that Phil was talking about earlier with the supply chain issues. Some of that is patch management. So they want to make sure that you are patching critical vulnerabilities within 14 days, and your other patch work within 30 days. So it's just making sure that those basic parts are there, and that your privilege access and stuff is secure as it can be. Moving forward, for companies that are controls, if you have accreditations like Cyber Essentials, Cyber Essentials Plus, if you go to the ISO 27001, then that gives the underwriter a level of comfort in how your organisation is approaching the cyber risk. And it's not that if you have them, you will get a 5%, 10%, 15% reduction in your premium, but there will be aspects of the premium or the risk that they feel is better, which will lower them or lower deductible, or allow you to have more crime cover, for example, if you've got all the policies and procedures in place, and it just kind of comes together that way instead of being a set discount, really.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I don't know if it's just myself, but I think we're struggling to hear you a little bit. It's sort of breaking up. I don't know whether you're able to speak a bit closer, a bit louder, but I think we got most of that. But I think that's a really interesting point. It's not around, can I just get my premiums down? What's the cheapest cover? Are we insurable? I think that's a really interesting point. And just picking up on supply chain risk, and some of those supply chains, we want evidence of how you're mitigating it. cybersecurity risk, but also have you got insurance? Really interesting one. Can we actually go and get insurance? So, from a commercial, aspect, that's key as well. So, that's interesting. Phil, I don't know if you wanted to jump back in on that. I know things like Cyber Essentials Plus vulnerability assessments are things you do lots of, and that probably helps in terms of from a governance perspective, from a risk management, but also that, when having discussions with insurers as well. But anything to add on the whole insurance piece?
Yeah, I mean, if we travel back sort of 18, 24 months and we look at possibly some of the questionnaires that would come through from an insurer around cyber insurance, because cyber attacks and cyber breaches were at the time probably not as rampant as they were. You might get and apologies, I might be being slightly I might be exaggerating slightly, so Kathryn, please don't judge me. But you might get a sort of a 3-page document through to respond to, whereas 24 months on now, you're probably getting a booklet of questions that you're going to be asked in order to become insurable for cyber insurance. And the volume and nature of questions has evolved so much because technology and the way in which hackers and criminal organizations are working in this space is evolving exponentially, and therefore the insurers need to respond to that, to therefore know that an organization is making and taking the right steps in order to deal with that. So you touched on some of the things. You've got Cyber Essentials Plus, which is a really good starting point. When we do that with organizations, part of that process involves a vulnerability scan, which is a scan of their whole IT estate to know whether there are any possible weaknesses in their defense from an external facing threat, commonly an internet facing threat. And many organizations are surprised when they're going through this for the first time, the volume of vulnerabilities that come through. They just assume that, the automatic updates that come through from Microsoft, you click a button and everything's fine. It doesn't work like that. There are so many ways and means of having to deal with this, and actually having an in-house team or expertise to be to shine the light on those areas is really important. So vulnerability management, sitting back and having a think about what your internal data is that you hold, the type of data, to then realize that you don't have to implement controls here, there, and everywhere. It's actually knowing what your crown jewels are and making sure that's secure. And then you can take a gradation sort of approach across your organization. Once you've got that understanding, it becomes more manageable. Cybersecurity is kind of seen as this massive bubble, this massive piece that's really hard to break down. And actually, it's only by biting off little chunks over time that you start to improve and take positive steps towards a better cybersecurity posture. And that doesn't happen overnight. It can't happen overnight. And especially the cultural changes that Sam and Stephen alluded to earlier, they definitely don't happen overnight. That takes time, but it's all stuff that people can begin now and work towards.
Okay, thank you. And just picking up on insurance, we've got a question in, so maybe we can just quickly pick up on that one there. So in the last couple of years, cyber insurance requirements have dramatically increased and become more stringent. Last year, it was a significant challenge to implement the required measures to obtain the policy. For an SME, this can be extremely costly and impactful. Do you see this leveling out? And Kathryn, I don't know whether you've got any thoughts on that.
So, I think, to be honest, last year was a critical year in terms of cyber insurance. As Phil said before, there was a lot of detail that was required to put in your insurance policy probably 3-4 years ago, where the claims and obviously the threats and the risk changed. Obviously, underwriters need more information in terms of how you're protecting yourself, because they don't want to be paying out money all the time for simple threats or claims. So I think where we are at the moment with the baseline of security that they required for SMEs, that was quite a big jump in terms of what needed to be implemented. I think going forward, we will still see this area evolve in terms of, there will be new technologies, there will be new defenses, there will be, new threats, and, it's evolved. So believe that there will be more. I think last year covered off the big bulk and majority of the baseline that I've been talking about before.
Okay, thank you for that. We've touched on this a few times around the role of the board. You know, this needs to be sponsored by someone at the top. Someone needs to own it. Someone needs to drive it in terms of the culture. It's not an IT problem on its own. So, Sam, maybe you can kick us off in terms of how you see the role of the board when it comes to cybersecurity.
So obviously, in general, the board's responsible for ensuring that risks to delivering the strategy are identified, evaluated and mitigated in line with business risk appetite. But that's going to include understanding the risk that cyber incidents present to the delivery of the business strategy, and also ensuring that the business has adequate cyber resilience to prevent, detect and respond to cyber attacks. Board members, they don't need to be technical experts. That's not what we're asking of them, but they need to know enough about cybersecurity to have constructive discussions with those key staff, so they can be confident that cyber risk is being appropriately managed within their business. At the end of the day, if you're hit by a cyber attack, that's going to impact all sorts of business processes and procedures, which the board have responsibility for. So they need to be taking responsibility for, the impact of those cyber attacks.
Yeah, and when I'm having conversations with FDs or MDs, often my question is, how do you get comfortable? How do you sleep at night? And how do you get that comfort? And that's quite an interesting conversation, because, like you say, you don't need to be technical, but you just need to know that someone is taking ownership for this, and there is a plan in place. So that's quite important. Stephen, I think you touched on boards and culture. How do you see the role of the board, and how can that sort of be influenced and changed, do you think?
Look, I think it's absolutely critical. It's the number one objective, I think, in putting a cyber resilient policy in place, because look, strong leadership, drives cybersecurity throughout the organisation, and there's been a few studies done this year which say that it's the number one factor that will make the most difference in terms of transforming cybersecurity over the next year to 18 months. And I think ultimately, this means the owners of a business or the board speaking out internally about their commitment to cyber resilience, and using their influence to drive through the necessary changes in the business or to improve them, and making sure that the business has, and this will be tailored to every business, but making sure that it's got adequate measures to make sure that the business is cyber resilient. As I say, you can't avoid human error. You can't avoid the fact that there will be people looking to attack a business and to gain access to its money, its data, for an unfair commercial advantage. Those things are here to stay. But what the board of businesses can do is make sure that the business is adequately resilient to that. And there's two ends to that spectrum. At the the stick end, if I can call it that, and the more worrying end, as I say, there's definitely a move now to looking at, well, who's liable for this if things go wrong, and some of these cybersecurity instances can be catastrophic for a business, particularly the reputational damage. Some of the supply chain incidents Phil mentioned, certainly one of them was a software provider in the cybersecurity field that was responsible for infecting its supply chain, and who knows about that reputational damage. But some of this damage can put a business under. And you can imagine a scenario. We're starting to see discussions around this at the moment, where businesses get catastrophically affected, particularly some smaller business, by cyber incidents. It may go insolvent. You may get a liquidator or administrator appointed afterwards, who will then be looking at misfeasance or breach of directors' duties claims against the board for failing to have put in place adequate and relatively basic cybersecurity measures, and in order to make those directors personally liable for the consequent losses. So look, that's at the scaremongering end of the spectrum here. At the other end, I think people need to realise again, a lot of this work is relatively simple. What needs to be put in place, and I'll give you an example. We dealt with a a really significant claim for a business which was a trading business, share trading business that ran on some very key proprietary software. And one of the employees took that software, took a left and sent it, effectively coded it and sent it to himself to an external email address, and then moved to a competitor. Fortunately, this was discovered in time, and very, very serious draconian injunctions were taken out against the employee, the departing fraudulent employee, and the new business he was joining, to prevent them getting access and getting the benefit of this software. Now, those are quite difficult measures to actually obtain from a court, absolutely necessary here. But life was made a lot easier there, because we were able to show the court that this employee had behaved dishonestly. And in turn, we were able to show that, amongst other things, because the company had a simple policy in place, which when employees joined, they signed a piece of paper that said, you're not allowed to send work-related stuff to a home email address. And he'd signed it. And we could therefore use that as part of the evidence to say, look, he's knowingly signed this and he's knowingly breached this. Therefore, this adds to the body of evidence that he'd been dishonest, and was enough to tip the court into persuading the court to grant the remedies that were sought there. So, serious case, serious ramifications, actually a very successful outcome. But it's just those little simple touches that businesses can put in place. But the changes that businesses need to take have to come from the very top down, to make sure that there are systems in place to say, look, we need to do these simple changes. We need to get the training in place, and make sure that they are followed, and that those policies and procedures are constantly monitored and they're updated. And so the business is continually resilient to this evolving landscape.
Thank you, Stephen. And yeah, some useful sort of examples there and recommendations. It's the tone at the top. Someone at the board level has to take ownership for driving this through to make it really effective. I'm conscious our 45 minutes has absolutely flown by. It's been fantastic hearing from our speakers and all their advice and recommendations. Sadly, cyber attacks are common. They're not going to go away anytime soon, but there are lots of things we can do, and there's lots of good material out there, including things from the NCIS, which we talked about earlier on. So I hope everyone has found it useful. Please do contact us if you would like to have any more information or to follow up on anything. And may I just say thank you once again for joining. Thank you to our panel, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.